Development by Robert Browning. My father was a scholar and knew Greek. When I was 5 years old, I asked him once, "What do you read about?" "The siege of Troy." "What is a siege? What is Troy?" Whereat he piled up chairs and tables for a town, set me atop for Priam, called our cat Helen, enticed away from home, he said, by wicked Paris, who couched somewhere close under the footstool, being cowardly, but whom, since she was worth the pains, Porpoise, Towser, and Tray, our dogs, the Atradi, sought by taking Troy to get possession of her. Always when great Achilles ceased to sulk, my pony in the stables, forth would prance and put to flight Hector, our page boy self. This taught me who was who and what was what. So far I rightly understood the case at 5 years old. A huge delight it proved, and still proves, thanks to that instructor sage, my father, who knew better than to turn straight learning's full flare on weak-eyed ignorance, or, worse yet, leave weak eyes to grow sand-blind, content with darkness and vacuity. It happened 2 or 3 years afterward that I and playmates playing at Troy Siege, my father came upon our make-believe. "How would you like to read yourself the tale, properly told, of which I gave you first merely such notions as a boy could bear? Pope now would give you the precise account of what someday, by dint of scholarship, you'll hear, who knows, from Homer's very mouth. Learn Greek by all means. Read the blind old man's sweetest of singers, Tuflos, which means blind, Edistros, which means sweetest. Time enough. Try anyhow to master him someday. Until when, take what serves for substitute. Read Pope by all means." So I ran through Pope, enjoyed the tale. What history so true? Also attacked my primer, duly drudged, grew fitter thus for what was promised next, the very thing itself, the actual words, when I could turn, say, Buttman to account. Time passed. I ripened somewhat. One fine day, quite ready for the Iliad, nothing less. Here's Hayne. Here the big books block the shelf. Don't skip a word. Thumb well the lexicon. I thumbed well and skipped no wise till I learned who was who, what was what from Homer's tongue, and there the end of learning. Had you asked the all-accomplished scholar 12 years old, who was it wrote Iliad? What a laugh! Why, Homer. All the world knows of his life. Doubtless some facts exist. It's everywhere. We have not settled, though, his place of birth. He begged for certain and was blind besides. 7 cities claim him. Scio, the best right, thinks Byron. What he wrote? The hymns we have. And there's the Battle of the Frogs and Mice, that's all. Unless they dig up Mergidus. I like that. Nothing more remains to know. Thus did youth spend a comfortable time. Until, what's this the Germans say is fact, that Wolf found out first? It's unpleasant work, their chopping change and settling one's belief. All the same, while we live, we learn, that's sure. So I bent brow over the Prolegomena, and after Wolf, a dozen of his like, proved that there never was any Troy at all, neither besiegers nor besieged, nay, worse, no actual Homer, No authentic text, no warrant for the fiction I, as fact, had treasured in my heart and soul so long. I, mark you, and as fact, held still hold, spite of new knowledge, in my heart of hearts and souls of souls, facts essenced, freed and fixed from accidental fancy's guardian sheath. Assuredly, thenceforward, thank my stars, however it got there, deprived who could, wring from my shrine my precious tenantry Helen, Ulysses, Hector and his spouse, Achilles and his friend. Though Wulf, Wulf, why must he needs come doubting, spoiling a dream? But then, no dream's worth waking, Browning says. And here's the reason I tell why I tell thus much. I, now mature man, you anticipate, may blame my father justifiably for letting me dream out my nonage thus, and only by such slow and sure degrees, permitting me to shift the grain from chaff, get truth and falsehood known and named as such. Why did he ever let me dream at all? Not bid me taste the story in its strength? Suppose my childhood was scarce qualified to rightly understand mythology. Silence, at least, was in his power to keep. I might have, somehow, correspondingly, well, who knows by what method, gained my gains, been taught by forthrights, not meanderings. My aim should be to loathe like Peleus' son a lie as hell's gate, love my wedded wife like Hector, and so on with all the rest. Could not I have excogitated this without believing such men really were? That is, he might have put in my hand the ethics, in translation, if you please, exact, no pretty lyings that improved, to suit the modern taste. No more, no less. The ethics. It is a treatise I find hard to read or write now that my hair is gray, and I can manage the original. At 5 years old, how ill it fared its leaves, now growing double over Stagirite. At least I saw it an old page with bread and milk, no crumble, dog-eared and deface, boy's way. It's development by Robert Browning. Now, I suppose I'll give you a moment of explanation, though very little is needed here. He's asked his father about what he reads, and he's given the Iliad as an example of the story of the siege of Troy by Homer. And it's first a game, and then he learns to read it in translation by Alexander Pope. And then he learns the Greek now. 12 years old, he learned enough Greek to read the original Iliad. That's quite an accomplishment. But he gets all of this down, all this wonderful story, and he's comfortable with that. It's like a boyhood dream. He's got the whole story. And then his father comes upon the German critic. I think his name was Frederick August Wolff. It's written like wolf in English. Unfortunate name for a critic of this type, who wrote the Prolegomena de Homera. And he wrote this in the late 1700s. I think it's very late 1700s, just before the 1800s. In this, he takes the text of the Iliad and he breaks it down and proves that there was never one writer named Homer. And that it was all a fiction. It was just all make-believe. The siege of Troy never happened. And there's that line about shifting the grain from shaft, which is a biblical reference. Wolff and his other philosophers in that area, critics in that area, also tried to do the same thing with the books of Moses. And they break it down where he proves that there was more than one writer, and when things were inserted into the Book of Moses, the 5 books of Moses, many readers of this text try to extrapolate that he's also talking about his belief in Christianity. And although Browning's beliefs in Christianity did change over time, I'm going to stick with the Homeric issue here. And there's an unintended irony that I can't help but think about. But anyway, so in the poem, his father reads this Prolegomena de Homerum, and it breaks that down, and it breaks down his belief. But Browning, to his credit, says, although there's, they proved that there was no Homer, there was no actual siege of Troy. He holds that in his heart anyway. He holds the story in his heart. It's what taught him right and wrong. It's what taught him things like to hate a lie and to love his wife and all the things you would find in the ethics. And then he kind of in the latter part of the poem thinks about, well, why did my father do this at all? You might write, the reader might rightly blame his father for ever making him read such nonsense, such stories. He might have given him a book of ethics, the nonfiction version of all of this stuff. And in the end of the poem, Browning says that didn't work very well on a 5-year-old, or I would imagine a 12-year-old for that matter. That whole thou shalt not and wagging of the fingers that the ethics do, the nonfiction version of this doesn't really work. It's the stories that inspire us to these sorts of things, the stories that inspire him and make him a better man. That's the motivation behind the poem. He's holding on to that. So Browning, he wrote this is in his last book. There is some, I have to address the unintended irony here. So Byron was writing this poem in his latter years, and it was published, it was like 1889 in Ossolanda. I can't remember, it was his last book. So he would have written this somewhere in his latter years in the 1870s, even 1880s, before it went to publication. I don't know where in that exactly it would have fallen, but it would have fallen somewhere in the late 1870s, early 1880s, probably, all the way up to, he died the same year this was published in 1889. But there was some other scholars who read Wolf and his like and set out in the opposite direction. They said, no, we're going to take this text seriously. We're going to use the works of the Iliad, just the work of the Iliad, and use it as a guide to bring us back. There's credit given to a guy named Schliemann, a German, who's kind of a strange character. I have a book around here that chronicles this, the In Search of the Trojan War. I picked up this book when I was living not far away from where Troy was. It actually was. And this book shows that they took the texts of Wolf and the rest of these people that proved that Troy never was, and the besiege, the story of Troy was fiction. And they used the Iliad as a map, a guide, to bring them back. And they ended up in Hisarlik, Turkey, which is north. It's on the coast of the Aegean Sea. Frank Culvert, an Englishman, was the first to discover it, although Schliemann, because he was the first to excavate there, is often given credit for finding it. But the point is, Browning was writing this at the time that they were discovering Troy and proving that Wolf and his ilk were wrong, and that there really was a Troy. And the archaeological evidence shows that there were several sieges. We don't know which one was the siege of Troy that Homer refers to, but and we don't know any of the other facts, whether there was any of these other characters, but they are historically validated. So Wolf and his ilk were wrong. And you can extrapolate that if you're going back to the books of Moses, whether that's going in that same direction. But that's a kind of an irony that wasn't built into the thing, but I can't help but enjoy that irony. Also, what I enjoy out of this is that Browning, despite facts to the contrary. Now, he believed that what Wolff had said was okay in his mind, that okay, they disproved Troy's, but he was willing to say that even though it may factually be wrong, it is still truth. And he's going to hold that truth in his heart. And that's where I hold on to this poem. They're the stories that inspire us, give us truth. Whether they be factual or not is not in question here. It's the truth that they bring to us. And I often wonder, in the second part of the title of this thing is why we still need stories in a modern age when we could have the ethics. We have the internet. We have all the facts we need. We can download the facts. And these internet games that my kids love. I don't play internet games, but my kids love them. The problem now I'm not trying to criticize video games or any of that kind of stuff, but what doesn't attract me to video games, what keeps me from enjoying video games, is there is no character arcs. There are no lessons learned. There's things to blow up and lots of action and all that kind of stuff. But without character arc, without development, as the poem is titled, or personal development, it's entertaining, but it doesn't give you the truths that stories give us, or help us develop our own characters. They can entertain, but they can't really develop character the way stories can. And that's why in this modern age of internet, with the facts of the entire universe at our fingertips, we still need stories. We still need to hold those stories in our hearts. So with that, I wish you good reading in 2020, BookTube. Have a great day.